Hi guys, it's Annie from Manure Farms. Today we're going to do a video and talk to you some about wintertime gardening or fall and winter gardening and composting during the wintertime. So a lot of people start thinking about their need for compost when they're ready to plant their spring garden. But if you start it early, then you have enough compost ready to go that's mature and you can use it on your spring garden. So let's get started. Come on. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when they start composting, they run out and get them a composting bin, something like this, and just start dumping all of their kitchen scraps in it. And voila, before you know it, they have a compost bin full of sludge instead of compost. So a real important thing to keep in mind when you're starting your composting journey, and admittedly I made the same mistake when I first started, is putting a good mixture of green material and brown material in with your compost bin. If you put just your kitchen scraps, which are considered green materials for composting, you'll end up just with this sticky, black, sludgy product as opposed to compost. So some of the brown things that you can add to your kitchen scraps to keep the composting process going well would be any kind of straw. So if you have pine straw in your flower beds, when you break that out at the end of the season and replace it, you can put that in there. Wood chips are a good way. If you don't have any access to brown stuff, you can just buy a bag of wood chips and sprinkle that in a few cups at a time as you go to keep the process going well. If you live on a farm like we do, we compost manure as well as kitchen scraps. So we'll go take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and give you a peek in here to see what's going on. It's November and we have pumpkins from Halloween that we're composting in there now. And as you can see, I put some brown straw in as well. You can also compost cardboard and brown paper, things like that will break down. Just avoid the shiny cardboard like cereal boxes, but any brown boxes like you get Amazon, Walmart boxes where you have something shipped to you, you can compost that, and that would account for some of the brown material. Ideally have it shredded up if you're going to put it into your compost. Okay, so this is our pile of composting cow manure. This is a mixture of cow manure and wood shavings. This comes out of my milking stall. So I cover it with wood shavings, and when they're used up, they go out here into this pile, and this pile will get turned about weekly until it completely decomposes into compost. Now I want to show you what compost actually looks like once it's complete. So this is not topsoil. This is where compost has been. This is black, broken down cow manure and bedding, either grass or wood shavings. And this can go into your garden mixed in with your topsoil and makes an excellent fertilizer and adds organic matter to your garden. It's very important to using compost in your organic gardening because it's a good source of fertilizer without actually using chemical fertilizers. So that's how we compost our cow manure, and usually we'll make a big pile out in the back pasture where we push all of the manure and grass or hay into a big pile with a bulldozer at the end of the year, once the cows have been eating on that throughout the wintertime. This is just my small pile that comes out of my milking room. So now we have another pile of compost out here that we're going to look at. This is in the process of breaking down, so this is not mature compost. As you can see, there's a mixture of kitchen scraps, green stuff, and a lot of this brown stuff that will decompose. But this stuff's important. This is where we've cleaned out old flower beds and taken all of the weeds and straw and everything out of there, and they've been thrown into this, and they'll continue to break down with our green kitchen scraps. So this will need to be turned weekly until it just turns into what looks like dirt, like what I showed you out there by the manure compost pile. When I turn it, I'll also wet it down. That aids in it heating up and holding moisture so that it can break down properly into compost. And I've just been putting this little mat over it just to kind of keep some extra heat in it in between. So that's kind of a quick rundown on compost. One of the things I don't think I mentioned earlier with regard to the amount of green to brown ratio, you want about 2/3 green and 1/3 brown to get a good breakdown on your compost without making sludge. One final word on compost. Our chicken pen is an area where they are naturally making compost. So this is chicken manure, and we fill it up with wood shavings until they're spent, and we just keep piling those on top of each other until we have several inches deep, and then we'll pull all this out and pile it into our big manure pile in the field that gets turned to compost. Now, a lot of this is actually already broken down at the bottom when we pull it out of here, because we do this once or twice a year. It takes about a year for chicken manure, straight up chicken manure, to sit and compost. But this is mixed with wood shavings, so it happens a little bit faster. But these are natural compost makers out here. Well, I said one more note on composting. I did want to mention rabbit manure. So this is our little room where we have our rabbits, and they have something that's called a cold manure. So it's not a hot manure like chicken manure, and you can see that it's in this pelleted form. Those can be added straight to your garden and will break down slowly, and they won't damage your vegetables if you put that in even before it breaks down. But rabbit manure is one of the best things you can put in your garden as a natural compost. Alright, so as promised, we're to the actual gardening section. So some of the things you're going to plant during the fall and winter of the year, particularly here in zone 8A, where we have very mild winters. Strawberries are one of the things that you will want to plant in the fall into the winter. Usually late October is a good time to plant strawberries, and that's what we have here. These are transplanted strawberries, so they look a little wimpy. They've just been put in here within the past week, but these will take over this winter and really thrive and produce a lot of great strawberries come the spring. So technically these are put in during the winter time or the fall, but we're looking for a spring crop on these. Some of the things that are going to give you actual wintertime crops would be lettuce. And we have some, these are, I forgot the name, there's some type of green. A lot of your green leafy vegetables grow well during the winter and fall. So again, we have some lettuce coming up. This can all be harvested this fall, this winter, and will do fine in the colder weather as well. Garlic is another vegetable that you're going to want to plant in the late fall here, and it'll be ready for harvest in early summer, but it'll do well throughout the winter time. Cilantro right over here is another vegetable or herb that does well during the late fall, early winter. It will take a few frosts before it, get out of the bed, Allie, before it will actually die back from the winter. Onions are another thing that do really well here during the winter and fall. You do have to have the correct type of onions if you want a bulb onion. These are just going to be green onions, but we will be planting some bulb onions. So I'll talk more about onions in another video when we set out our bulb onion sets in another couple of weeks, and we'll talk about the different varieties of onions and what type you need for your area. In between each of these little green onion rows, we have carrots planted. So they're just coming up, and they'll produce a crop this winter. Carrots do really well during the winter time. If you have mild winters where they're not going to completely freeze, they'll continue to grow and produce. So we're looking forward to seeing how these carrots turn out. I have some more that are a little bit further along, but these here were planted shortly after I planted the onions, and I was just taking up some of the space in the flower bed and seeing how they would do down here between the onions. Now these beds are filled up with a mixture of topsoil and our composted cow manure from our big compost pile out in the pasture. So again, that's one of the things that you can fill your flower beds or your little vegetable beds with as well for natural fertilizer. We also top dress this with an organic garden home vegetable fertilizer as well. So we'll see how all of these veggies and all do as the next couple of months progress. Okay, and this is my final winter bed. In retrospect, this is probably not the ideal place to put a winter bed because you want your winter bed to get most of the sun throughout the day, and this bed gets a lot of evening shade, but we'll see how it does anyway. So these are carrots, and I had one little spot back here that didn't come up very well, and I've replanted that area. This is just topsoil out here that I worked a little bit of rabbit manure into, and like I was talking about, rabbit manure can be added directly to your beds without having to compost down. So I had that available at the time. I worked that in with a small amount of mature compost, and that's what this bed is. Now there was a lot of sand in this area because it's right up against the house, and there was a lot of sand from the masons when they bricked the house. This is Swiss chard here, and this will grow well in the wintertime here in the south and stand up to a few frosts. Now today was our first frost of the season, pretty close to when it should be based on our zone, but all of these held up fine out here. We also have cabbage, and I've got a few holes in my leaves, so I'm going to spray this with a spinosad based spray, which is an organic spray that'll get rid of the probably little cabbage worms eating my leaves. But these are doing pretty well. A few of them I've replanted where they didn't come up. This back here is a Chinese cabbage. It will also do well even during the cold season.
What's this over here?
And right there is beets. And again, this is an area that ideally should get a little bit more sun than what it is getting. But we'll see how they do. And then in the back, there's actually one little kale plant here that did come up, but several did not come up, and they've been replanted. So it's kind of late in the year for them to have been planted. We'll see how they do. And in here, I'm gonna move out of the sunlight. This is a leek, and my leeks didn't come up really well, but I do have a few in there. So they can take up to 21 days to actually come up. Yeah, so these, we'll see how they do. They're supposed to grow well during the winter time here in the south. And that's just a quick overview of a little bit of what I'm doing here in the winter time as far as actually growing stuff, as opposed to just preparing for spring planting. I've got a few things planted in these raised beds. I've had to cover it with wire because my cats keep trying to use it as a litter box. So this is doing pretty good to keep them out. We'll see how things do over the winter in this bed. And that's it. So composting and winter gardening in prep for spring.